felt the world shift the very moment that silence fell over me, heavy like a door being shut from the inside. There were no screams, no arguments, no warning, just a click. One single click that cut a bond I had spent years holding together. In that moment, the feeling wasn't just rejection. It was as if someone had torn out an entire piece of my story, without asking if I was ready to lose it. I stared at the screen, unable to understand how a relationship built on so many tears, so many sacrifices, so many interrupted conversations, and so many attempts to begin again could be reduced to the coldness of such a quick gesture. The block itself wasn't what hurt the most. It was the weight of what it represented. It felt like everything I had tried to prevent for years was finally happening right in front of me. My heart tightened in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone, a pressure that sits somewhere between hurt and disbelief, between love and an open wound. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of words. It was an abyss echoing everything I had feared experiencing with her. Emotional distance, misinterpretation, the feeling of being disposable in the life of someone I once carried in my arms, someone I protected with my own body, someone I loved with the kind of love no one teaches. And that's exactly why I want you to write in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your state, your country, because this story belongs to mothers, daughters, women, and people who have felt the pain of being pushed away by the very ones they tried hardest to keep close. As the silence settled over the days that followed, I realized I wasn't just dealing with absence. I was dealing with everything that the block had exposed, the messages that would never arrive, the conversations we would never have, the explanations echoing inside me with nowhere to land. I walked through the house like someone trying to reorganize her own soul, trying to understand at what point I stopped being a safe place and became a burden. And yet, beneath the pain, there was something deeper, almost imperceptible, like a thin thread pulling my heart toward a larger understanding. When love suffocates, God creates space. When a bond becomes unhealthy, God allows distance. When a cycle needs adjusting, He allows silence to teach what daily closeness can no longer reveal. But it hurts. It hurts like memories being ripped straight from your chest. Only someone who has loved deeply understands the impact of a cut made without warning, the feeling of being unseen, the doubt about what you did, what you didn't do, what you should have done differently. And the cruelest part is that the love you feel doesn't disappear with the block. It stays, throbbing, trying to find ways to keep existing even without space to be expressed. You try to be rational, to tell yourself it's just a phase, just an emotional reaction, something she'll move past. But the heart doesn't understand logic. The heart feels, bleeds, tightens, remembers. For days, I waited for a message that never came. I waited for her to change her mind, to remember who I had been to her, to recall everything we built even through our missteps. But only silence came. A silence that spoke to me more than any words could. It was as if God whispered, "Now it's your turn to breathe. Now it's your turn to see yourself outside the role you've carried for so long. Now it's your turn to understand that love cannot be a prison, a duty, or a constant demand. Love needs space to renew, and sometimes that space only shows up when something breaks." I walked through the house, revisiting memories I never asked to revisit. Her first hug, the first time she called me Mom, with that small voice that melts any pain. The nights I watched her breathe while she slept. The days I worked myself to exhaustion but lit up the moment she walked through the door. And now, all these chapters carried a bitter taste, as if questioned by this sudden block. But deep down I knew her gesture didn't erase our history. It didn't erase who I was. It didn't erase the love I gave. It only revealed that something inside her was hurting too, trying to reorganize itself. And that realization allowed me to breathe again. Because when someone blocks you, they're not just blocking you. They're blocking their own pain, their own frustration, their own attempt to understand what they don't yet know how to name. I wasn't the absence she imagined. I was the escape she needed at that moment. And accepting that is painful, but also freeing. Freeing because, for the first time, I realized I cannot control what she feels, what she thinks, or the pace of her healing. Freeing because I understood that love isn't insistence, it's surrender. Freeing because my role was never to prevent her from distancing herself. It was to respect what she didn't know how to express with words. And as all of this rose inside me like a deep tide, something began to shift. The initial pain softened into a strange, unexpected understanding, a sense that maybe this distance was a divine invitation for me to revisit parts of myself I had long abandoned. Maybe it was the chance I never had to see my life outside the role of mother, to acknowledge my own wounds, my own needs, to hear my own soul calling for help, while I insisted on silencing everything for her sake. Maybe it wasn't punishment. Maybe it was breath. And it is right at this point, this threshold between pain and understanding, that the story deepens. Because the click that marked that block wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I never imagined living. Something that would pull me out of my silence, confront me with truths I had hidden for years, and force me to revisit the moment when motherhood became both my greatest strength and my greatest prison. It is from here, from this impact that still echoes in my chest, that the next part of my story begins to form. The days that followed that block stretched endlessly, as if time had slowed down just to remind me, minute by minute, that I was waiting for something that might never come. The unspoken pain settled inside me like an unwanted guest, silent, but present in every corner of the house, in every empty space where there once was connection, conversation, relationship. I woke up each morning, and the first thing my heart searched for was a notification. From her, a tiny light on my screen telling me she had changed her mind. I imagined what it would feel like to see her name there again, even if it was a short, distant message, anything that told me the bond still existed. But nothing appeared, nothing moved, nothing changed. It's strange how silence can be so loud. The more I waited, the more I realized that the silence wasn't just around me. It was inside me, stirring feelings I thought were long resolved, poking at memories I believed I had outgrown. I wandered around the house trying to distract myself, but everything reminded me of her. A mug she used, a photo on a shelf, the way she always left the TV volume too high. Small details that once blended into our routine now pierced through me like sharp edges. And at the same time, I could feel that something inside me also needed to break in order to be rebuilt. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was just a phase, an impulsive gesture, that she was hurt, overwhelmed, tired, and that once things settled, everything would return to normal. But even when my mind tried to make sense of everything, my heart stayed trapped in that simple, devastating act. I waited for a message that, deep down, I knew wouldn't come until she was ready. And that waiting led me into a place within myself that I had avoided for years, a place where old emotional needs slept, where my deepest wounds were stored, where the loneliness I had lived through before echoed again. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me felt rejected in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about her blocking me. It was about all the times I had swallowed abandonment, all the times I had been forced to keep going alone, all the times I waited for people who never returned. Her block touched wounds I thought were healed, but were actually buried under layers of routine, responsibility, and forced strength. And this is the part of pain no one talks about. When someone hurts you in the present, they often awaken every wound you've ever carried. At times, I wondered if I had truly done everything I could, if I had made more mistakes than I realized, if my way of loving, so full of protection and silence, had suffocated her without me noticing. These weren't questions meant to punish me. They were meant to help me understand. Because when love doesn't know where to go, it becomes reflection. And reflection, even when it hurts, opens doors we've kept locked for years. That's where we recognize our fragilities, our failures, our patterns. And it's also where we begin to see that nobody loves without leaving marks, but nobody loves without carrying burdens. I replayed old conversations in my mind, fragments of things she once said without realizing how deeply they cut. Moments when maybe I was firmer than I needed to be, situations where I should have embraced her, but chose to stay strong. And at the same time, I relived the countless times I gave her the best of me, when I had nothing left to give. My love was never small. My love was never absent. My love simply had its own form, shaped by everything I lived long before she was born. But in that silence, even my greatest efforts felt insufficient. That's why I want you to write in the comments, I've waited for someone before, because waiting is part of the story of those who love, even when waiting hurts more than losing. As the days passed, I realized my emotional expectations were unraveling. I oscillated between hope and resignation, between wanting to reach out and fearing I might worsen what I didn't understand. I wanted her to unblock me, but I wanted it to be her choice. I wanted her to miss me, but not out of guilt. I wanted clarity, but clarity doesn't come from pressure. It comes from time. And that's when I started paying attention to what was unfolding inside me. The waiting, as painful as it was revealing layers of my soul I had never stopped to listen to. I found myself confronted with my own need for emotional control, my difficulty admitting pain, my deep fear of losing bonds. I realized I had carried through life the belief that I had to keep everyone close at any cost, even if it meant taking on extra burdens, silencing my needs, swallowing my tears. And now, with my daughter distant, I was forced to face a truth I had ignored. I didn't know how to handle distance because I had lived my entire life learning to endure, not to release. The loneliness of those days wasn't new, but it felt different. It carried the weight of love that had nowhere to land. I made coffee, and without thinking, poured 2 cups. I arranged the cushions on the couch, expecting her to walk in at any moment. I looked at my phone the way one looks at a distant horizon, searching for a sign, a gesture, a bridge, but nothing came. And slowly, the silence began shaping an unexpected understanding inside me. Maybe this block was a mirror reflecting my oldest emotional needs, a mirror bringing to light the child inside me who once waited for love that never arrived, a mirror showing that my pain wasn't just about her, it was about everything I had carried without admitting. And the more this understanding took form, the more I realized that the waiting was creating new ground within me, a ground where I could finally learn to breathe without fear of losing, a ground where love could exist without turning into emotional debt, a ground where distance wasn't abandonment, it was pause. And pause, I was beginning to understand, is also love. Pause is space. Pause is reflection. Pause is God saying, observe, grow, let go, allow. Write in the comments, I deserve emotional rest, because so often we confuse love with exhaustion, care with burden, presence with suffocation. And it was then, right in that place of pain and revelation, that I realized the story didn't end with her absence. The story was simply changing shape. Something inside me was beginning to reorganize, preparing me to understand not only my own feelings, but perhaps hers too. And this quiet understanding would lead me into the next chapter, where love, even wounded, would begin to find new ways to exist. The weight of guilt began growing inside me like something I could no longer push aside. It was as if every minute of that silence forced me to look at parts of my story I had tried to protect even from myself. When she blocked me, the first impact was pain, but the second was guilt. An old guilt that had been sleeping for years, now awake with enough force to steal my breath. I silently asked myself what so many mothers have asked, without speaking the words aloud, only feeling the answer ache in the chest. Did I fail her? Not fail as a mother who chooses wrong, but fail as someone who tried so hard to get everything right that, in the end, may have hurt by loving too much. Guilt has a cruel way of distorting memory. It takes the moments in which we were strong and turns them into harshness. It takes the moments in which we tried to protect and turns them into control. It takes the silence we kept out of love and turns it into emotional distance. And as I replayed each chapter of our story in my mind, I noticed gaps I had never filled, conversations I never dared to have, explanations I postponed because I thought the time wasn't right. But time doesn't wait for anyone. And when the moment arrived for her to look at me with judgment, I know. Longer had the words. I had spent my life saving everything, and when the time came to speak, I didn't know where to begin. I remembered difficult phases in her life, moments when she faced insecurity, changes, internal storms that I could only see from the outside, moments when maybe I should have sat beside her and said, I've felt that too. I've been lost too. I've been scared too. But instead, I was too strong, too firm, too composed. And too much composure creates this emotional gap where someone needing comfort feels only the concrete of responsibility. I carried the role of holding her up for so long that I forgot that support also means showing weakness, showing scars, letting the other know they're not alone in their fears. I began revisiting specific moments when my behavior might have sent the wrong message, like the day she cried over something that seemed small to me, and I tried to show her it wasn't the end of the world. My intention was to strengthen her, but did she see it as coldness? Or the day I corrected her too harshly because I was exhausted, though she had no way of knowing what I was carrying on my shoulders. Did she keep that as a wound? Did my temporary roughness become, for her, the definition of my motherhood? Write in the comments, "I've blamed myself too much," because that sentence carries the truth of so many women who gave everything and still feel it wasn't enough. So many mothers who sacrificed their bodies, their time, their souls, and still go to bed wondering if they failed somewhere. And maybe they did, not because they didn't love, but because they're human. It's strange how guilt has no interest in fairness. It's not concerned with the nights I stayed awake for her. It doesn't care about the times I held her when she fell apart. It doesn't care about the sacrifices I made, the pain I swallowed, the battles I fought in silence to make her life easier. Guilt clings only to what was imperfect, misunderstood, or left unsaid. And in those days that followed the block, guilt became a constant companion walking beside me, pointing out every crack, every shadow, every possible flaw. I began to wonder if my love, for being so silent, ended up creating more holes than bridges. Did my apparent emotional absence leave a stronger mark than my actual presence? Did my firmness make her believe she didn't need me, or worse, that I didn't want to be close? Did I hide myself so deeply inside my own strength that she never found a path to reach me? And if all of that was my fault? These questions became so intense that at times I felt my breath shorten. I looked around the house, now so quiet, and thought about all the opportunities I let slip away. I could have explained more. I could have apologized more. I could have hugged her more often. I could have said out loud things I assumed she would understand just by looking at me. But no one understands what has never been spoken. No one deciphers what has never been revealed. And the more guilt grew inside me, the more I realized that her distance had awakened in me not just pain, but an urgent need to look honestly at my own story. I wasn't perfect, and I never tried to be. I did what I could with the tools I had, with the heart I possessed, with the wounds I was still carrying. But even knowing that, a part of me kept whispering, "You failed. You could have been softer. You could have been more open. You could have been more human." It's painful to admit that maybe her pain now has roots in something I did without realizing. And even more painful to know I can't go back and fix it. But there is something deeper, the awareness that even when we fail, our intentions are not always seen. And that hurts, because the person we want most to understand us is usually the one who steps away. There was a moment during those days of silence when I sat on the living room floor and finally allowed all that guilt to overflow. I cried for everything I did and everything I didn't do. I cried for the words I hid, for the fears I disguised, for the moments I wanted to show vulnerability but couldn't. I cried for the mother I was and the mother I wished I had been. I cried because deep down, I knew her pain was also mine, a distorted reflection of the love that, in trying to protect, ended up creating invisible scars. And as I cried, I realized something that rearranged my silence from the inside out. Guilt only exists where there is love. When someone doesn't care, they feel no guilt. And that realization brought a truth that began to warm a space where only heaviness lived before. Guilt was showing me that my connection with her still existed, that despite the block, something between us was still alive, something that needed to be seen, healed, redefined. Guilt was the reminder that it wasn't too late, that there was still time, that there was still a story waiting to be revealed and restored. I want you to write in the comments, "I did the best I could." This sentence is not an excuse. It's acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the journey, of the choices, of the sacrifices. Acknowledgement of the strength so many women carry without ever receiving a thank you. And as I recognized my mistakes and accepted my limitations, something began to shift inside me. The weight of guilt, even though it was still there, began transforming into awareness. An awareness preparing me not only to face what I had done, but also to face what she carried. Because her distance wasn't only a reflection of my silence, it was a reflection of her own pain too. Pain I might never have noticed. Pain I might have tried to shield her from. Pain that found its way through anyway. And it is exactly at this point, where guilt blends with love, and love blends with the deep desire for reconciliation, that the tone of the story begins to change, opening space for something even deeper, something that explains not only her silence, but also the ghosts I carried. And that inevitably touched our relationship. My daughter's wounds began revealing themselves to me long before I had the courage to admit it. And still, when she blocked me, my first instinct was to look only at my own pain. But as the silent days went by, something inside me began whispering a truth I didn't want to hear. She wasn't running from me. She was running from herself, running from pains she didn't know how to name, running from emotions that grew inside her without space to be understood, running from pressures she felt, even when I believed I was protecting her, running from expectations she thought she had to meet, many of which I never knew existed, running from her own emotional shadow, which at some point became confused with my presence. When a daughter blocks her mother, the world wants to turn it into maternal guilt, but the truth is more complex, more human, more fragile. Each person loves and suffers in a different language, and her language was never silence, like mine. Her silence always carried storms she couldn't tame. She grew up seeing my strength, my firmness, my posture, and believed she had to be the same. She believed she couldn't fail, couldn't show weakness, couldn't admit fear. And when life finally demanded a strength she didn't yet have, she collapsed emotionally, quiet, inward, devastating. She didn't block me because she hated me. She blocked me because she didn't know how to be vulnerable in front of me. She didn't know how to tell me she was tired. She didn't know how to confess she had failed, because she believed failure was unacceptable for someone raised by a mother who seemed unbreakable. It's painful to realize that what I did to protect her was also what pushed her away. She confused my strength with demands, confused my silence with pressure, confused my firm love with expectations she could never reach. And so, each internal conflict she faced made her feel that I was the mirror that exposed her the most. Not because I said anything, but because my existence reminded her of the image she believed she had to uphold. There are wounds that don't bleed, they suffocate, and hers was exactly that, the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be as strong as she thought I was. She grew up pressured by a standard I didn't know she carried, pressured to not disappoint me in situations I didn't even know she considered tests, pressured to prove things to me that I never asked for. And when she finally felt she had failed, she blocked the whole world, starting with me, because I was the image that hurt the most. Not because of who I was, but because of who she believed she needed to be beside me. I began to understand that her pain came from places I couldn't reach, places where memories mixed with interpretation, places where she stored insecurities she never voiced, places where small moments became mountains, places where conversations we never had turned into conclusions she assumed were true. And part of me ached deeply, realizing that while I tried to protect her from the world, she was hurting inside herself. I want you to write in the comments, "I've run without knowing why," because emotional escape is more common than people admit. There are moments in a daughter's life when she pulls away, not because she doesn't love her mother, but because she can't love herself while standing next to her mother, because she feels she disappointed, failed, didn't measure up. And that weight is not the mother's fault. It's the result of the invisible pressures life places on a woman while she's still forming. Social pressures, emotional pressures, internal pressures. And often, these pressures explode in the most common form of self-protection: distance. I began to see that my daughter was fighting her own ghosts. Ghosts of rejection she lived outside our home. Ghosts of insecurity fueled by unavoidable comparisons. Ghosts from relationships that wounded her. Ghosts of choices she judged herself for. She didn't block me because I was her pain, but because I was the territory where she feared exposing her weakness. She believed that by blocking me, she was creating space to process her feelings. She believed silence would help her reorganize her chaos. She believed that being without contact would allow her to breathe without the weight of expectations she had created herself. And though my heart clenched with that realization, I began to understand that maybe this distance was her soul's way of asking for help, not directly, but in the only way she could, by creating space. And the more I understood this, the more I realized the block wasn't rejection. It was a desperate search for air. My daughter needed to breathe, needed to find herself, needed to discover who she was outside the shadow she believed I cast. She needed to learn to love herself without comparing that love to mine. She needed to understand she didn't have to be perfect to be loved. She needed to know that no mother loves less because her child stumbled. Write in the comments, "I am not responsible for pain I didn't cause." This sentence frees mothers from guilt that never belonged to them. And as this understanding grew within me, something deeper began to move. I realized her distance wasn't the end of our story, but the beginning of a chapter that would require a new kind of love from me. A love capable of letting go. A love capable of allowing her to confront her own shadow without me trying to shine light before she was ready. A love that understood even when it didn't agree. a love that respected silence even when silence hurt. And it is here, where my pain meets hers, and both reveal truths long hidden, that the story shifts again, preparing for something even more profound, something that will show how God moves precisely in the spaces where words don't exist, stitching together what distance tried to tear apart. I realized, as I watched my daughter distance herself, that much of the gap between us wasn't created by what I did, but by what I hid. And admitting that is painful, because a mother never imagines her way of protecting could one day be interpreted as coldness. But the truth must be spoken. I protected her so much that she couldn't see me behind my own armor. An armor I built not from lack of love, but from too much of it. Every silence was a shield, every sacrifice a shelter, every restrained gesture an attempt to prevent her from carrying pain that didn't belong to her. And without noticing, the more I tried to keep my world intact so hers could be light, the more I erased parts of myself she needed to know. When a mother goes silent out of love, the world rarely sees it as love. It sees coldness, distance, hardness, indifference. And my daughter grew up knowing only the surface of what I showed, not the depth of what I hid. She saw the strong mother, not the exhausted woman. She saw the firm mother, not the one who cried in secret. She saw the mother who handled everything, not the woman who shook alone in the dark. I hid so much for so many years that my daughter learned to relate only to my invincible version. And no one can truly connect with someone who never seems to fall apart. Because fragility builds bridges, but too much strength becomes a wall. I want you to write in the comments, I've hidden myself to protect someone, because this is the truth of countless women who turned silence into a form of love, knowing that silence could cost them understanding later. And I know exactly when my silence became part of who I was. It was in the early years of motherhood, when I realized my body, my mind, and my soul would need to split into 1,000 pieces so she could have stability. I swallowed fears, hid exhaustion, stayed quiet in moments that could shake her sense of safety. I became a fortress without visible cracks, and once that fortress became my way of surviving, I longer knew how to let anyone see me crumble, not even her. Life taught me early that showing pain is opening a door for someone to use it against you, and because my pain had been used as a weapon before, I learned to guard it like a dangerous secret. Motherhood only reinforced that. I used to think, if I cry, she feels it. If I falter, she collapses. If I tremble, she loses her ground. So I stayed silent. Silent when I was humiliated. Silent when I was treated unfairly. Silent when fear tightened my chest. Silent when the world felt heavy. And that silence, born from protection, became my emotional language, a language she never learned to read. As the years passed, my silence became a kind of mask. People around me thought I was made of ice, that I didn't feel, that I didn't hurt, that nothing could shake me. My daughter, unable to understand what was underneath it all, believed that too. Because children don't interpret intentions, they interpret behavior. And silent behavior, repeated over and over, becomes a story. She grew up thinking I didn't need anyone, and because of that, she believed I would never let her in completely. I tried to show love through gestures, through presence, through quiet care, but my daughter was always sensitive to words, sensitive to verbal affection, spontaneous hugs, long conversations I never learned how to have, because my own story never taught me that language. Her language was dialogue, mine was silence, and when two worlds meet, with such different emotional dialects, someone inevitably feels unloved, even when they are deeply loved. My distance was never emotional, it was protective, but from her side, it sounded like absence, because she had no way of knowing that on nights when I seemed cold, I was actually trying to hold back the avalanche of my own life so it wouldn't spill onto hers. She had no way of knowing that when I didn't talk about my pain, it was to keep her from feeling responsible for things that didn't belong to her. She had no way of knowing that when I responded briefly, it was because inside me there was a storm I couldn't afford to unleash. I want you to write in the comments, my silence had a reason, because this is so important. Anyone who lived quietly out of love needs to recognize themselves in this space. I understand now that my daughter longed for emotional closeness, while I offered practical stability. She wanted to see my heart. I gave her structure. She wanted to hear my soul. I gave her safety, and that created a distance that was unintentional, but real. A distance that grew with time, like a thin shadow that slowly became an abyss. And that abyss wasn't born from lack of love. It was born from too much protection. I silenced myself so much that she couldn't tell where I ended and where my sacrifices began. She saw the results, but not the process. She saw the fortress, but not the cost. She saw the control, but not the fear. And because she never saw it, she assumed I didn't feel. My daughter grew up thinking I was impenetrable, and no one seeks comfort in someone who seems unfamiliar with pain. It was then that I began to see how my way of loving pushed her away without my noticing. Because a daughter doesn't draw close to someone who seems too perfect. Perfection intimidates. Perfection wounds those who don't feel perfect themselves. And without meaning to, my strength turned into superiority in her eyes. Not because I felt superior, but because she felt inferior whenever she couldn't be as resilient as I was. And so, while I believed I was protecting her, she believed she was being compared. While I thought I was shielding her, she thought she was being measured. While I thought I was being strong, she thought she was being left behind. This difference between intention and perception is what destroys relationships, especially mother-daughter relationships. And the more I return to these memories, the more I see that all of this wasn't just explaining her distance, but preparing the ground for what was coming. Because the truth is, no silence stays intact forever. It always reveals itself, always spills over, always finds a way to be interpreted, whether for good or for harm. And my silence was about to be confronted in a way I never imagined, opening doors to something much larger than just the story of two people. It was the beginning of a movement connecting past, present, and future, guiding the narrative toward the next stage, where destinies begin to align in ways neither of us could have predicted. I realized, slowly, that the distance that hurt so deeply wasn't just about the two of us. It was bigger, deeper, more spiritual than I could see at first. Because there are moments in life when God allows something to be removed from our reach so we can finally see what we've spent years avoiding. Sometimes He creates distance to produce healing, and that healing doesn't come immediately, nor does it arrive wrapped in comfort. It comes in the form of silence. A silence that exposes, that cleans, that reorganizes what was tangled inside the soul. I began to understand that her blocking me wasn't just an impulsive act from a wounded daughter. It was also a divine tool forcing me to look at myself without turning away. At first, I resisted. I fought it like someone trying to retrieve something unfairly taken. I wanted to insist on contact, to break the distance, to explain myself, to be heard at any cost. But God has a very distinct way of teaching. He closes doors we shouldn't force open. And the more I tried to run after her, the more I sensed that I was moving against something that wasn't earthly. It was divine. It was as if He were telling me, stop, be still, watch, breathe. I am doing something you don't understand yet. And it was only when my heart began to calm that I realized God never removes something without first preparing space for something greater. I want you to write in the comments, I trust God's timing. Because trusting His timing is accepting that what feels like loss may be protection, what feels like abandonment may be refinement, and what feels like rejection may actually be the beginning of a profound realignment. I was always a woman who learned to solve everything with my own hands, but there was a situation now that couldn't be fixed with effort, insistence, or desperation. It was a wound that wouldn't heal quickly, and the more I tried to understand it, the more I realized God was calling me into a place of introspection I had never entered before. Motherhood had taught me to fight for everyone else, but now God wanted me to fight for myself. He wanted me to see how my silence had become armor, but also a prison, how my love had become a shield, but also a wall. The distance between me and my daughter was revealing, for the first time, all the parts of me I had pushed aside for years. I began to see my limits, my fears, my emotional patterns, my old wounds I kept ignoring. And for the first time, I understood that God was using her absence to show me areas inside myself that needed urgent healing. Healing I had never sought, because I was too busy being strong for everyone else. Healing I postponed, believing time would fix it, when in truth, time had only layered it with more pain. And it was when I finally allowed myself to look inward without flinching that I realized I had treated my emotions as enemies for years. I stayed silent, thinking it made me unshakable. I hid my wounds, thinking it made me respectable. I avoided vulnerability, thinking it made me safe. But God was using my daughter's silence to show me I needed to relearn how to exist. I needed to unlearn the weight I'd carried alone. I needed to relearn how to breathe without measuring every feeling inside me. And it was painful, but necessary. I want you to write in the comments, "I accept the healing God is doing in me." This phrase is a pact with your own process, because healing doesn't happen when we want. It happens when we surrender. I began to see that many of the times I tried to get close to her in the past, I was still emotionally trapped in wounds I never treated. My heart spoke through pain, not clarity. God was pulling me back for a moment so He could realign me completely, so I could return with more wisdom, more truth, more emotional presence. I needed to see myself before wanting to be seen. I needed to hear myself before wanting to be heard. I needed to heal before trying to fix anything between us. And this understanding didn't come through grand revelations. It came through tiny perceptions, almost invisible, like waking up one morning and realizing I felt calmer than the week before, or noticing I no longer checked my phone compulsively waiting for a message that never came, or feeling my heart slowly learn how to rest. God was shaping me in silence. He was working at the root, in the depth where no one sees. The same way I had done for her for so many years, He was now doing for me. And while He worked, I realized the distance was for her as well, because sometimes God needs to remove the mother from the daughter's reach, so the daughter can finally see her own reflection clearly, so she can learn to manage her emotions without projecting them onto me, so she can identify her own patterns, her own wounds, her own burdens. The distance I once saw as punishment was slowly becoming revelation, because God never separates to destroy. He separates to transform. I began to understand that God was creating a new space between us, a space where I would not be just a fortress, but a person, a space where she would not be only a hurt daughter, but a growing woman, a space where we could meet with new eyes, without old expectations, without invisible demands, without inherited emotional patterns, a clean space, prepared by God's own hand. I want you to write in the comments, God is preparing something in me. Because He is. He always is. Even when everything looks still. As the days passed, I realized the pain was still there, but changing shape. It was no longer the suffocating pain that burned my chest. It was a pain turning into understanding. A pain that opened pathways. A pain that taught. A pain that, little by little, stopped being a wound and became wisdom. And I understood this transformation was only happening because God had pulled me away from the noise outside, so I could hear the voice inside, the one He had been trying to reveal for years. The truth is, some types of healing only happen in absence, only happen when we're forced to stop, only happen when life removes what we thought was essential, only happen when the heart breaks in the exact place where it needs to be rebuilt. And there, in that imposed silence, God began restoring parts of me I didn't even remember existed. But I knew He wasn't doing all of this just for me. He was preparing something still to come, something that would change the direction of our relationship, something that would reveal purpose in what once seemed like nothing but pain, something that would connect all the pieces of this emotional puzzle we lived for so many years. And that awareness grew inside me like a quiet but persistent feeling that the next chapter was approaching, ready to reveal the reason behind every silence, every distance, every hidden tear. When the distance finally settled in fully, when there were no more attempts, when her silence became definitive for a time I couldn't measure, something unexpected began happening inside me. For the first time, I had nowhere to place my attention. For the first time, there were no messages to wait for, no responses to rehearse, no explanations to prepare. Her silence created a space so vast that, without noticing, I was pushed inward, and it was there, in the emptiness that first felt like pain, that I discovered I had never truly listened to myself. In her silence, I heard myself for the first time. I always believed I knew who I was, but I realized that much of what I called identity was, in truth, survival. Parts of myself shaped by fear, by trauma, by excessive responsibility, by the need to be strong all the time. I found myself facing questions I had never dared ask, and I realized that for years I had clung to motherhood as something that filled the hollows inside me. And when she blocked me, the anchor I had relied on for so long snapped. For the first time, I had to confront my own soul, without using her as a place to hide. I want you to write in the comments, I deserve to hear myself. because that sentence reveals the courage of someone who finally agrees to look inward. I began revisiting parts of myself that had been asleep, expectations I had placed on her without realizing, fears I disguised as care, old emotional needs I dressed up as strength. I realized that many times I asked her for a closeness that, deep down, had nothing to do with her. It had everything to do with me, with the girl I once was, the one who never had anyone to listen, to hold her, to soothe her. I had created a silent fantasy of healing, and without noticing, placed on my daughter a weight she was never meant to carry. And understanding that felt like having air poured back into my lungs. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it broke me. But it also freed me. Because while I believed I had lost something, I was actually reclaiming myself. It was as if God held a mirror in front of my spirit and said, "Now look, now see, now understand who you've always been beyond the roles, beyond the pain, beyond the silence." Her distance forced me to rebuild my identity not as a mother, but as a woman. I realized my entire life had revolved so much around her that I never stopped to discover what I liked, what I wanted, what I needed. I realized I had lost my own voice trying to protect hers, and in that process, something even deeper became clear. I had been emotionally dependent on a relationship that was never meant to fill my inner voids. Mothers don't say this out loud, but many of us carry the secret expectation of being saved by our children in ways we don't even realize. And when her silence removed that emotional escape from me, I had to confront my original wounds. I had to accept that inside me lived the same frightened girl who grew up surrounded by shouting, loss, and rejection. A girl who never received love the way she needed. And, because of that, tried to love her daughter with an intensity that sometimes suffocated. Because when you were never truly seen, you try to love others the way you wish someone had loved you. And even then, they don't always receive it the same way. I had to see that to finally breathe without guilt. I want you to write in the comments, "I am finding myself again." That sentence marks an inner rebirth, an awakening few people have the courage to face. Little by little, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not because the distance didn't hurt anymore, but because I began to understand that the pain was cleansing me. God was removing excesses, distorted expectations, hidden emotional dependencies. He was giving me back to myself. And when a woman returns to herself, everything around her begins to realign. It was in that place of rediscovery that the revelation began to form inside me. A truth so deep it felt like a soft, undeniable spiritual wave passing through my chest. I realized that for years, I believed protecting my daughter also meant keeping her close emotionally. But now I understood that love is not possession. Love is not control. Love is not demand. Love is not need. Love is freedom. And in that block that hurt so much, she had given me a gift I didn't recognize at first, the chance to finally be free. Yes, she freed me from old pains, from old beliefs, from old roles, from expectations that suffocated me, from emotional patterns I repeated without realizing. She freed me from the burden of thinking I had to carry everything, freed me from the guilt of believing that any mistake of mine would destroy our relationship, freed me from the silent obligation to be perfect, strong, unbeatable, unshaken. She freed me from the fear of being myself, and when that revelation settled inside me, something shifted. I realized the loss of contact had opened a door I would never have had the courage to open alone. I had been pushed into my own emotional destiny, and instead of collapsing, I was reborn. The woman who emerged was different, more aware, more whole, more in control of herself. For the first time, I didn't need her to exist. For the first time, I could love her without erasing myself. For the first time, I could look at myself without fearing what I would find. I want those who are here with me to write in the comments, "Love sets me free too," because love that traps is not love, it's fear. Love that suffocates is not love, it's emotional hunger. Love that demands is not love, it's insecurity. True love is the one that allows each person to breathe in their own time. The revelation kept growing inside me like a light expanding slowly, illuminating every hidden corner of the soul. I realized that the distance wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a new phase, a phase where neither of us would repeat old wounds, old fantasies, old behaviors, a phase where each of us could finally exist as women, not as each other's emotional extensions. And the more I understood this, the clearer it became that God was preparing something greater, something still unfolding, something that would explain everything that once felt unfair, painful, even cruel. I felt that love hadn't broken. It simply needed room to breathe, and what would come next depended on this deep breath he was allowing between us. The story doesn't end here. What was about to happen would completely change the meaning of that block and reveal the purpose hidden behind every silence, every tear, every sacrifice. Love that doesn't suffocate learns how to breathe. And that's what I finally understood when I looked at everything I lived through with new eyes. No relationship can flourish under expectations no one can sustain. There is no healing when the heart tries to hold on to what God is asking us to release for a moment. And there is no freedom when love insists on disguising itself as need. What I lived taught me that loving is not keeping someone close at any cost. It's allowing each soul to find its own place, its own time, its own rhythm. Loving is understanding that even distance can be God's tool to restore what once seemed lost. My whole life, I tried to protect too much, hold too tightly, grip too hard. And in the end, I learned that the wisest love is the love with courage to create space. It's the love that doesn't block another person's growth. It's the love that recognizes each person has their own process, their own passage, their own revelations. It's the love that understands God works in silence, and that many times transformation happens far from our sight. I learned that presence can be gentle, that affection can be quiet, and that a bond remains even without constant dialogue. The heart that truly loves doesn't give up, but it doesn't imprison either. It respects, it waits, it breathes. Today, I carry a different kind of peace, not the peace that comes when everything is as I wish, but the peace that comes when I finally understand God is in control even of the details I don't comprehend. He shapes, rearranges, distances to align, draws closer to heal, and that understanding gives me serenity, because in the end, the love that frees itself returns more mature. The love that breathes returns more aware. The love that learns to exist without suffocating stops being a weight and becomes a bridge. I want you to write in the comments, "My love knows how to breathe," because that sentence represents the lesson learned by those who understand that loving is not holding tight. It's supporting without imprisoning. And now that your mind and heart are open to a new depth, continue this path of wisdom and revelation. Another The Matriarch Secrets video is appearing on your screen, a completely different story from this one, yet filled with the same spiritual strength, the same emotional intensity, and the same truth that transforms. Allow the next narrative to reach parts of you that still need light. Click the video beside this one and step into the next journey God has prepared for you.